In this episode of Quakers Today, we are curious about the impacts of affinity groups and how they offer a place for community and spiritual nourishment.
Writer and activist Eileen Flanagan tells us about her new book, Common Ground: How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation.
Willa Tabor shares how a queer Christian Quaker meeting gave her joy and community while navigating her transition.
Vanessa Julye and Spence, two African-American friends, speak from the heart about why affinity spaces are a sacred necessity. I am Peterson Toscano.
And I am Sweet Miche.
This is Season 5, Episode 2 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation.
This season of Quakers Today is sponsored by Friends Fiduciary and the American Friends Service Committee.
Hey, Sweet Miche, one of the many things I appreciate about Quakers is the commitment to seeing and understanding people who are marginalized in society. As a society, we aspire to create and maintain a welcoming space for those who are often excluded from traditional religious settings.
Yeah, when it comes to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and non-binary people, most Quaker meetings in North America and Europe are welcoming and inclusive. But that wasn't always the case. So over 50 years ago, LGBTQ plus Quakers started creating spaces for themselves.
And now LGBTQ plus people serve on committees, clerk yearly meetings, and are fully integrated into the life of most meetings and Quaker organizations in North America and Europe. In fact, the queer Quaker group known as FLGBTQC right now is in the midst of a discerning process about whether they should lay down their ministry.
So what about race? African Americans and Indigenous people have been connected with Quakers for hundreds of years. What is their relationship with predominantly white North American and European Quaker meetings, schools, and organizations?
One of our guests today is Vanessa Julye. She serves as Associate Secretary for Organizational Cultural Transformation with Friends General Conference, or FGC.
Vanessa works to raise awareness about white supremacy and its impact in both Quaker communities and other faith spaces. She also meets with and creates programs for BIPOC friends around the world, sometimes in person, sometimes virtually.
Vanessa co-authored the book Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship, a very important and influential book. For the October 2025 issue of Friends Journal, Vanessa wrote the article Affinity Spaces for BIPOC Friends, Healing from Polite White Supremacy Together.
I sat down and chatted with Vanessa about her article, why she wrote it, and why now.
Also joining us is Spence, the author of the article We Gather to Breathe, Affinity, Worship, and the Light That Disrupts. It also appears in Friends Journal.
We will share with you excerpts from both articles, along with parts of our conversation.
Hi, I am Vanessa Julye, a member of Central Philadelphia monthly meeting, Ujima Friends meeting, and also I am staff for Friends General Conference. I live in a world that practices what Yawu Brown calls polite white supremacy, PWS. In a society structured around PWS, with subtle, coded, and ever-present demands to conform, BIPOC friends often feel compelled to prioritize white comfort over our own authenticity. As Brown notes, PWS operates through comfort, control, and confidentiality, reinforcing whiteness as normative and marginalizing others. Polite white supremacy attempts to control language, narrative, and perception, creating white privilege and the sense of entitlement. It creates a code that keeps a hierarchical system by race, violent, yet relentlessly claiming its subtlety, as it blinds people to how the disenfranchisement of BIPOC people enriches their lives. Most white people in the United States of America, including Friends, live in a constant affinity space where their culture is considered the default. Eurocentric norms shape Quaker spaces. Some will say that this does not apply to the Religious Society of Friends because we are unique. Our community is different. We are the first religion to end enslavement, after all. Quakerism itself is an affinity space set apart from broader society. The joy many friends feel at yearly meetings or the FGC gathering mirrors what BIPOC friends feel in our own sacred spaces. Just as white friends find renewal in community, BIPOC friends need that too, especially as we navigate heightened isolation in meetings, schools, and workplaces. I want a place where my needs, experiences, and feelings are centered. A place where my brown skin, kinky hair, clothing, food, music, and dance are all seen and treated as normal. In the BIPOC affinity spaces, my body relaxes, my tone and language change. In affinity spaces, we share our lives and get a chance to center and celebrate our abnormality, an abnormality I have grown to cherish. Having a space where I do not need to constantly center polite white supremacy provides an opportunity for me to breathe. I've gone to Quaker schools as a kid in Quaker camp, but it wasn't until 93 that I actually started attending worship. And there were times when I had experiences that felt were racism that I was thinking, well, no, these are Quakers, so this can't be happening. It was wonderful to be able to be with this group of friends of color who validated for me what I was experiencing were actually times when white supremacy and racism were showing up because that's part of our society. Quakers are part of our society. As much as we like to see ourselves as being different and exempt, we are not. You know, there have been times when I've been told and others have been told we're too loud or we're too angry. And um, yeah, we're angry and I have a right to express that anger, but that anger can also get us killed. And expressing that anger can get us killed or it can have us lose jobs because the expectation is that we won't express them. That is a part of the white politeness. Our culture, our assumptions are based on our history. When we ignore that, then we're not having an understanding of how we got where we are today and why are we still behaving and reacting in certain ways today. Not all BIPOC people feel the need to interact with other BIPOC people. If there's a BIPOC person within Quakerism looking for a place where they can have more connections with other BIPOC people, there are resources out there. We have a Ministry on Racism program which supports BIPOC spaces. We have retreats, some are hybrid. If you need something in addition to being in the predominantly white Quaker spaces, those are available. And I encourage you to check them out, and including Ujima Friends meeting as well. But there are some friends who have said, I can't worship in my meeting anymore. And I'm so glad that these spaces are available because without them, I'm not clear that I would continue to be a member of the Religious Society of Friends. You know, I know that folks would like for all of our spaces to be integrated, but sometimes it comes down to you have that affinity space and have that person who feels that they can still be a part of the Quaker community that gives them that choice as opposed to, sorry, I have to leave. I hope that there is a time when we can stop justifying affinity spaces. Sadly, I don't think that time's going to come until we shift the definition of normal. Right now, normal is very narrow and represents a small section of the population. Until all of us are able to feel that we fit that definition of normal, we're going to need the affinity spaces.
My name's Curtis Spence. I didn't join a BIPOC Quaker affinity group because I had something to teach. BIPOC stands for Brown, Black, Indigenous People of Color. I joined because I needed to breathe. And if I'm honest, I've been disrupted in the best way. Affinity groups have long been sacred spaces for bonding, connecting, communicating authentically, places where deeper relationships are built not in spite of difference, but through shared experience of being fully seen. These are spaces where people bring their full selves into the room, where trust is not assumed but nurtured. You think about some of the other groups like the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or softball or baseball teams or other teams. Those are obviously also affinity groups. Affinity worship groups are not escapes. They are spaces of spiritual integrity, places where friends who have long been marginalized by mainstream Quaker culture can listen to the divine without having to over-explain their presence and their pain. These groups don't ask you to leave part of yourself outside the door. They ask you to bring all of it in, your joy, your fatigue, your ancestry, and your truth. Just being present in a space where friends are naming hard truths about history, about systems, about survival has pushed me out of complacency and into clarity. These spaces are not alternatives to meeting, they are sites of revelation. I'm uncomfortable in some of these spaces myself, but being there and listening or engaging or just being open to it helps me grow and develop. This is the work of affinity worship, to create a space where beauty and disruption coexist and where neither must apologize for arriving. Affinity spaces offer a kind of soul rest, a resolution of voice and breath. Here we can explore queries like, is wonder a privilege? Sometimes, but it's also resistance, a way of surviving with dignity even when the world forgets. Or is it possible to lack access to beauty? Yes, not because beauty isn't present, but because the weight of survival can make it hard to see. This is not theoretical. These are lived experiences of friends who show up every week seeking light, not in spite of the world, but in full recognition of it. What I've come to understand is that affinity worship is not separation. It is witness. It is testimony to the truth that a light speaks in many languages. And sometimes you need to be among those who carry a shared rhythm to hear it clearly. These gatherings have not pulled me away from Quakerism. They've pulled me deeper into it. They've shown me what it means to worship in spirit and in truth, even when truth is heavy. So we gather differently to stay whole. We didn't gather somewhere to divide the body. We gathered elsewhere to remain whole within it. In these gatherings, we pray, we question, we speak plainly, we may cry sometimes, we hold silence, and we hold each other. These are not fringe gatherings. They are testimonies in real time. They are reminders that the meeting is larger than its walls, and that the spirit often moves loudest where systems have been quiet longest.
That was Vanessa Julye and Curtis Spence. Their articles appear in the October 2025 issue of Friends Journal and at friendsjournal.org. You'll find links to their articles and the video conversation at quakerstoday.org.
This is a very difficult time to be a trans person in the United States. So many people who want to be allies with the trans community, in fact, don't know many trans people and have never heard people tell their story. And so the one thing I can do in this situation is to be telling my story. I'm Willa Tabor. I'm a transgender woman. I live in Arlington, Massachusetts, and attend Fresh Pond Meeting. And I'm also a regular attender at Three Rivers Meeting, which is a monthly meeting in New England yearly meeting that meets entirely on Zoom. Joy was my guidepost through my transition. And I realized that at the age of 70, I was too old to postpone joy. I realized shortly after that at 4 years old, I was too old to postpone joy, but I didn't know it then. Three Rivers is a monthly meeting in New England yearly meeting, and it identifies as a queer Christian meeting. I know that Christianity, especially in the trans community, is eyed with a skeptical eye. It isn't trans people's job to heal Christianity, especially at the risk of traumatizing themselves. In the trans community, there's a strong there's a lot of very deeply spiritual people. If you're seeking for a spiritual community, look around and find one that fits and is welcoming. Any church or any spiritual organization only exists to try to provide scaffolding for a person's spiritual growth. The place where that comes from is that voice inside. I will say the ability of the divine to speak to us. There is a voice inside you that knows what it is you need to do and is trying to tell you. First thing I would say is find that voice, trust it, and listen to it. And eventually it will lead you to the community you need to find.
That was Willa Tabor from the Quaker Speak video Identity and Christianity, Navigating Gender Transition as a Quaker.
A big thank you to Layla Cuthrell for filming and editing these videos. You can watch them on YouTube or at quakerspeak.com.
Perhaps more than any other influence, the Quaker writer and activist Eileen Flanagan has shaped my life as a potential change maker in the world. Eileen walks the walk of an activist and teacher, and she clearly communicates the practices and principles that lead to meaningful action. I reached out to Eileen to learn more about her new book, Common Grounds: How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation.
Okay, I bought the book. I got it in the mail yesterday. I'm so excited to read it. I love Eileen's writing and her work with Daniel Hunter as well.
All right, let's hear what she has to say. So, Eileen Flanagan, you're addicted to writing. Is that the issue? You just can't stop.
It's one of those leadings that just will not let me go. I came to Pendle Hill in 1992 to discern if I was a Quaker and if I was a writer. And I discerned both in my early 30s at Pendle Hill.
And it stuck.
It did.
This current book, talk about why you wrote it and why now.
I was at a conference at Haverford and there was a query about our vision of living in right relationship. The words that came to me that felt very much like a message was, it's not about us saving the earth. The earth will survive whether we do or not. But the crisis of the earth is saving us from our illusion of separation. That last part is the subtitle of the book. This was 2014. And I had just heard an Indigenous woman give a speech about the campaign that stopped a pipeline in Canada, where her First Nations community partnered with local ranchers to stop this pipeline because they both recognized they had a stake in protecting the land and the water that they rely on. And she said, I have to thank Enbridge, the pipeline company, for bringing our communities together. And I was starting to hear stories like that that really were inspiring. I was already a climate activist and the board clerk at the time of Quaker Action Team, and felt drawn to this possibility that there could be some healing among humans as we're trying to heal the earth. When I started writing the book a few years later, I sort of thought, "Oh, I'll have all these happy stories of people coming together." And what I found was some of that, and also some of the reasons it's so hard for those kinds of coalitions to win. That campaign did actually stop the pipeline, but many don't, even if there is this beautiful coming together. So the second part of your question was why now? I did not have the foresight to publish this book now. I felt that this leading dragged on way too long, and Spirit was way too slow in leading me to the right publisher. It was actually kind of frustrating for a couple of years there. And now I see that it was exactly the right time because many of the lessons in the book about solidarity, about taking on billionaires, are directly applicable to what people are trying to do now in resisting authoritarianism in the United States. So Spirit knew why now, but I didn't when I started.
You are, in addition to a Quaker and a writer, an activist. You fit firmly into the rebel role and a helper. You talk about those four roles, the rebel, the helper, the advocate, the organizer. What are you seeing happening with activism now? It seems like a lot of people are confused about what their next steps are, and there's a lot of fear.
There's absolutely a lot of fear. And I think having a particular role can help with that. Training can help with that. Spiritual grounding absolutely can help with that. A lot of times people ask me, what can my meeting do? And my first thing is your meeting can help support people discern what they're led to do. Because I think sometimes meetings think we all have to do the same thing together. And if your meeting figures that out, God bless you. But to me, the primary purpose of the meeting is to keep us collectively and individually in touch with Spirit. And that also helps with fear. Even when we're led to do something scary, if it's a leading, I think it feels different. In terms of the roles, I would actually say that I'm an organizer by nature. I just happen to feel led to join a rebel group. So Quaker Action Team, or Equate, is definitely in the rebel camp and was formed because we recognized that there were other Quakers lobbying Congress. FCNL does that so well. That wouldn't be our role. We would be a different plant in the ecosystem, right? We're not providing direct service or things like that. I am also seeing more people feeling led to the rebel role in these times. I just went to a meeting of people of faith who want to do who feel called to do civil disobedience around ICE. And my partner in the get to know you thing was a Jewish woman who's like, I've never done anything like this before, but my grandparents were immigrants. Right. So there's definitely a greater sense of urgency. And I think those are times where more people move into the rebel role. But we need all of them. We still need help people, you know, lobbying our decision makers. We need people organizing, bringing groups together. We need people playing the helper role, which could either be keep planting trees because climate change is still a problem, even though it's not talked about as much, or it could be providing food and medics for all the big protests happening. There's lots and lots of work to do. The book is Common Ground, How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation. And when I first started writing, The Illusion of Separation was the title. And a very smart member of my meeting, who I respect a lot, when she heard that years ago, she was like, you might want to get a catchier title. But what's funny about that is that now people get it. There's something shifting in the consciousness. So I've been on book tour in several states. I'm here in a parking lot in Illinois. I start my book talks by asking people to do an icebreaker with their neighbor. What do you think that means, the illusion of separation? And every single group has come up with lots of really good answers about what it could refer to.
It's what made me decide to have this interview with you, where we're talking about affinity groups in this particular episode. And there was something so striking about this, the illusion of separation. Break that down for me a little bit.
So the separation that first interested me in writing, and it's a big part of the book, but not the whole book, is the separation of race. So, for example, there are a lot of communities from Chester, Pennsylvania to Cancer Alley, Louisiana, where the frontline community is usually low income, often people of color who are right next to the oil refinery or the gas plant or the toxic dump. And they smell the smells and they hear the sirens and they can see the flare go off at the refinery and they know they're breathing toxic air. But there's often a neighborhood half a mile away or a mile or 2 miles away that's breathing the same air. They're often a working class white neighborhood, but they very often don't realize that they have a pollution problem, even though they have the same high asthma rates or almost as high rates of cancer and heart disease. And that was part of me. I mean, there's plenty in here of me breaking down my own illusions. When my daughter at age 5 got asthma and I took her to the emergency room and said, "Why is this happening?" to the nurse, she's like, "Probably pollution." I didn't realize that my neighborhood full of trees was still being impacted by the oil refinery in Southwest Philly. So that's one layer, but I think it applies to so many things right now, Peterson. I've been thinking a lot about how cis women and trans people are being pitted against each other. Trans women in particular and cis women are being pitted against each other in a very deliberate strategy. Guess what? Christian nationalist patriarchy is bad for all of us. Maybe not equally, right? So again and again, I found we have a shared stake, even if the risks aren't exactly equal, which is different than just being an ally. Like, I'm your ally, but it doesn't really affect me. I think it's different to say we have a shared stake. The first chapter is the story of when I went to the Louisiana oil and gas industry meeting. So I was surrounded by 300 executives from the companies I hate most, like Exxon and Shell. I wore my high heels and tried to kind of look like I fit in, which I didn't. And it was a real spiritual crisis for me. I'll read a little bit of that section. I set it up by talking about how my father worked on a Sun oil tanker. My great grandfathers were both coal miners. I understand people needing to get a job. I talked to industry workers in Louisiana. And even when people had very different politics than mine, I was able to find a connection with them. But those executives were hard for me to talk to. So here's a little section of chapter 1. At the conference happy hour, I tried approaching a few women, but struggled to chit-chat, even though I normally love engaging strangers. I believe that on a spiritual level, we are all part of a larger whole, but it felt like a thin fish line of connection, hard to see under the hotel chandeliers. Although I had gone to hear their side of the story, I couldn't stop the running critique in my head about how delusional they were. Did my Quaker belief that there was that of God in every person mean I had to see the divinity in them? I believed it did, but I wasn't sure how to do that, given that companies like Exxon were responsible for an unfathomable amount of harm. The human death toll from climate change could easily be in the hundreds of millions. I boiled down my dilemma to a challenging theological question. How do I love my neighbor when he is killing my other neighbors? Back home, I shared my Lamoga experience, Louisiana Mid-Atlantic Oil and Gas Association conference experience, with the Quaker Support and Accountability Committee that meets with me regularly to help me stay in touch with Spirit's guidance for my work. One member said she could empathize with industry's feeling of victimhood, which I had pointed out with incredulity. It's true that people want to sue them, she said. It's true that people want them to pay more taxes, one of the recurring complaints at the conference. Put this way, by a woman of color who is quick to empathize with those hurt by industry, I could glimpse how executives felt beleaguered. From their worldview, they were just defending their profits, which was their obligation to their shareholders in a capitalist system. Where can I find any empathy for these people who, in my mind, are just causing so much harm out of greed? I started to find some of the illusion of separation in myself, the ways that I wasn't so different from them. When I came home to my work with Quaker Action Team, I got to interrupt a corporate executive from a company doing tremendous harm. And I felt like I was able to speak from a different place, along with other Equate members, not by letting this guy off the hook at all, but by seeing his humanity and articulating that we understand you're under pressure to make money for your shareholders, and we're asking you to be held to a different standard here. And I felt like it was much more effective when we were able to speak from that place. The next chapter, I quote Dr. King, who says that we need both power and love. Just loving our enemies is not really enough when people are doing great harm. Quaker Action Team really believes in this idea of Dr. King that we need love and power, that the two together can make change in a different way.
Obviously, you would like lots of people to read this book, but who do you think is prime for this book right now?
Quakers are kind of struggling with this idea of how do we see that of God in everyone when some people are clearly doing so much harm. So that message is there. There are people struggling with what to do. And there are some very practical lessons in the book about solidarity and building coalitions and building power through things like direct action. And for people who think they kind of know all that already, one of my favorite chapters, I interviewed Daniel Hunter, who I know a lot of friends are following. And I talked to Daniel about how different groups have navigated race and how we talk about race in many issues where we have a shared but unequal impact. Daniel is so brilliant. I think that that chapter, for again, people who kind of think they have the environmental justice talking points, is really thought provoking about the pros and cons of different choices we can make in how we frame things.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us for Quakers Today. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
Eileen Flanagan's book is Common Ground: How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation. You can learn more about Eileen, her tour, and her writing at eileenflanagan.com.
You can read a book review by Rua Swinterfeld at friendsjournal.com. Sweet Miche, you have a recommendation for us, I believe.
I do. But before I share mine, our guests have given us some great recommendations as well. From Vanessa and Curtis, we heard about Ujima Friends Meeting, an online community of friends of African descent. They meet on Sundays for worship and Wednesdays for a prayer gathering. You can learn more about them at ujimafriends.org. From Willa, we heard about Three Rivers, an online queer Christian meeting. They meet on Thursdays for worship and Sunday evenings for Vespers. They're at threeriversmeeting.org. And my recommendation for Affinity Space is the Quaker Discord channel. Discord is an app used to connect to communities with a shared interest, much like a subreddit or an old school chat room. In the Society of Friends Discord server, there are channels for friends who speak Spanish, queer friends, disabled friends, and friends who are into gardening or cooking. The URL of the server isn't podcast friendly. It's a jumble of many numbers and letters. But as always, you can find links to our recommendations in our show notes at Quakers Today
You know, I used to be active in that group, and I think I got a new computer and never uploaded the app. So this is a great reminder because there was always some great conversations there and lots of like affinity groups within affinity groups. It's very sweet.
Absolutely. And it's really active. There have
Very
been
active.
several posts today.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Quakers Today. If you enjoy hearing our guests give ministry on the podcast, the best way to support us is to subscribe to Friends Journal.
The second best way is to rate and review our show. Many thanks to everyone who's been sharing Quakers Today with their friends and on social media. Quakers Today is written and produced by you, Peterson Toscano.
And you, Sweet Miche. Music on today's show comes from Epidemic Sound. Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee and Friends Fiduciary.
The American Friends Service Committee works at the forefront of social change to meet urgent needs, challenge injustice, and build peace. Millions of U.S. children rely on free school meals. In 2024, Congress created a program to help low-income families buy groceries during summer break, but 11 states refused to participate. AFSC is urging governors to accept the funding so kids can eat. You can help. Find out how to speak up at afsc.org/no-hunger-summer. Learn about other initiatives and actions at afsc.org.
Friends Fiduciary unites Quaker values with expert investing. They serve more than 460 organizations with their ethical portfolios, shareholder advocacy, and a deep commitment to justice and sustainability. In the 2024-25 proxy season, Friends Fiduciary engaged with more than 50 companies on over 30 issue areas. They filed 18 shareholder resolutions that addressed ethical business practices, advancing equity, and more. Friends Fiduciary builds a better future through values-driven investing. Learn more at friendsfiduciary.org.
Visit quakerstoday.org to see our show notes and a full transcript of this episode.
Thank you, friend. We'll see you next month. Until then, may you walk gently and find strength in community.
Let me share with you next month's question. For this one, I was inspired by a special collection I saw at Lutnick Library at Haverford College. Professor Emma Lapsanke-Werner taught a first-year writing seminar called Good Guys and Gals. The class collected books where Quakers are portrayed as plain-dressed saviors and others where Quakers are troublemakers. But the collection also featured fiction where Quaker characters are more complex. So here's my question for you. Who is someone you've encountered in fiction that embodies Quakerness? The character could be from a book or movie. They could be a hero of the story or an extra without any lines.
All right, so it doesn't have to be a Quaker, though.
No, absolutely not.
There's just something about them.
Something about them. Anything.
Well, okay. As soon as I saw this in the script, I thought of Dinah from Marianne Evans' novel Adam Bede. Evans is better known by her pen name, George Eliot. She created this character named Dinah, who is a Methodist minister who dresses plainly and lives this countercultural life of service. She's such a great character. She just shines on the page, this like sincerity that she has. She moves to the beat of her own drum. Like she is, definitely being led by the Spirit. And she often confounds people by the choices that she makes and the places that she is unafraid to go because she feels led to do it. So I love that novel, Adam Bede, and Dinah. She even has a little Quaker bonnet that she wears.
Amazing.
All right, so here's the question again. Who is someone you've encountered in fiction that embodies Quakerness? Let us know what they did that resonated with you.
You can answer that question through several different channels. You can leave us a voicemail with your name and the town where you live. Our number is 317-Quakers. You can also send us an email with your response, or comment or DM us on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. I'll have the links to call, email, and follow us in our show notes over at quakerstoday.org.